Hello. We're going to do a quick review over the last couple of days, the big mistakes that Napoleon made. Okay, so he's on top of the world, right? One of the largest empires since Alexander the Great, and then he makes terrible mistakes. So, for example, 2 days ago, we talked about the continental system, one of his first big mistakes. Deciding that you can take on the British Navy when you don't have as strong a navy is a big mistake. Okay, so he tried to put on a blockade. Britain said, I'll show you a blockade, counter blockade, and France wasn't able to actually hold people accountable in his entire empire. So the continental system is considered by historians a big mistake. Second big mistake, in order to force Portugal, you can see here on the bottom left, and Russia, who's very far away geographically, in order to force the rules of the blockade upon them, he decides that he is going to go on the offense. That leads us to his second big mistake. His second big mistake was the Peninsular Campaign, where he decided he was going to forcefully march 300,000 of his men through Spain and go to Portugal and put the smackdown on Portugal. The problem is the people of Spain did not like that one bit, so he forced his brother onto the crown in Spain, thinking that would help. It only made the situation worse. The Spanish people rise up, and in a guerrilla war campaign against the French, they just attack. And it's kind of like death by 100 little paper cuts, or 1,000 little paper cuts. The French military are going to suffer all along the way. What he thought was going to take 20 days ended up taking 4 years, and he loses 300,000 men in the process. Not what he expected. That's the second big mistake, is the Peninsular Campaign or the Peninsular War. Finally, his last big mistake that we talked about yesterday, or that you listened to yesterday, was Napoleon's decision to march upon Russia. You saw charts and analyzed that perhaps as low as 422,000 and as high as perhaps 600,000 men are part of this grand army Napoleon puts together, march into Russia. Due to Russia's military strategy, which is a scorched earth policy. They retreat, don't meet them on the battlefield, lead them into kind of the middle of nowhere with no resources. And finally, when Napoleon gets to Russia, he waits around for Tsar Alexander's forces to finally meet him in Moscow, and they don't. He decides he needs to hightail and get it out of there, but it's already October, the temperatures start to drop, and all along the way, Russian forces are sniping at the French and raiding the French retreat along the way. And so, the third big mistake is Napoleon in Russia, perhaps coming out with as few as 10,000 men. Today we're going to talk about Napoleon's downfall in one slide. Okay, so when Napoleon's enemies watch all of this happen and they see him weakened, cut by all the little paper cuts, they decide now is the time to try to take power back in Europe. And so Napoleon's enemies were quick to take advantage of his weakness. Britain and Russia and Prussia and Sweden and others are going to join forces against him. Austria, even though there's family connection, they're going to declare war on Napoleon, despite his marriage to Marie Louise, that beautiful little 19-year-old that finally produced a son, not when she was 19. All the main powers of Europe, in effect, are now at war with France. Okay? In only a few months, Napoleon did manage to raise another army. However, most of his troops are really green. Okay? They are fresh, they're untrained, they're ill-prepared for battle. He's trying to organize and mobilize them super quickly. And as a result, they just don't have the training that they need to be successful. He faced the allied armies of the European powers outside the German city of Leipzig in October of 1813. The Allied forces easily defeated his inexperienced army, and French resistance crumbled fairly quickly. By January of 1814, the Allied armies were pushing steadily toward Paris. Some 2 months later, King Frederick William III of Prussia and Tsar Alexander I of Russia led their troops in a triumphant parade through the French capital. And now Napoleon is embarrassed, right? The Allies expect no further trouble from Napoleon because, though Napoleon wanted to fight on, his generals refused, and in April of 1814 he accepted the terms of surrender, gave up his throne. The victors gave Napoleon a really small pension and exiled him, which means to banish him, to an island called Elba. It's a really tiny island. It's right off the coast of Italy. The Allies expected no further trouble because they assume he's just going to kind of live out his life with this nice little pension. And if you remember the video clip, he was getting older, he has a son, and they're kind of thinking maybe he'd just like to take it easy now. However, they didn't exile him far enough away. So here's Elba. You can see close to France, close to Italy, just too close, just too close. And so he makes a comeback, okay? First of all, I don't know if France is bipolar or what. It just can't decide what it's going to do, and despite all of the troubles that it's had around kings, they are going to be desperate at this point and put another King Louis back on the throne. So King Louis XVI's brother assumed the throne. This is now Louis XVIII, the executed king's son. Louis XVII had died in prison in 1795. However, the new king quickly became really unpopular among his subjects, especially the peasants. Imagine that. They suspected him of wanting to undo all of the kind of reforms that the revolution had instituted, which he probably did. So there he is, looking snappy in the old robes. But the news of Louis's troubles is going to provide Napoleon an incentive. He decides he wants to try to regain power, and he thinks this is his opportunity. So he escapes from Elba with the help of a small group of people, and on March 1st of 1815, he lands back in France. Joyous crowds welcomed him on his march to Paris. Now, I do have to tell you, there's additional story to this. Supposedly what happens is when the people learn ahead of time that he is headed back on this boat with a small little entourage to France. When he lands on the shores, there are the king's soldiers there waiting for him. And what I've read is that he opens up his coat and says, here I am, here I am. If you're going to kill me, go ahead and kill me now. But if you do, then you lose out on an opportunity. If you really prefer the king to me, then go ahead and shoot me now. And supposedly the soldiers were overcome by this kind of act of bravery and this act of defiance on his part, and decided they'd rather join a man like this than they would support a soft and plush king who's provided no backbone to them. Plus, they're worried about what the king's going to do with all these revolutionary reforms. So the bottom line is they don't shoot him. They don't shoot Napoleon, and instead they turn around and join him. And so, by the time it's March 1st, the crowds have joined. He's marching onto Paris. Thousands of volunteers are swelling in this ranks of army around him. And within days, Napoleon has now regained the title of Emperor of Rome. Kind of crazy. Now, in response, the European allies are like, what? They quickly marshaled their armies, and the British army, led by a guy named the Duke of Wellington, who you can see here on the right. Look at that dapper little guy there in his red suit. They prepare for battle. They happen to meet near a village called Waterloo in Belgium, and on June 18th of 1815, Napoleon and his new, freshly kind of mobilized army are going to meet the Duke of Wellington at Waterloo. Napoleon attacks, and the British army defends the ground around Waterloo all day long. Late in the afternoon, the Prussian army arrived as reinforcements, and together the British and the Prussian forces are just simply too much for the French. 2 days later, Napoleon's exhausted troops have given way, and the British and Prussian forces are chasing them from the field. This defeat is the end of Napoleon's kind of bid for power. So now he's been defeated by the Duke of Wellington. His campaign, called the 100 Days campaign, because that's how long about it lasts. And Napoleon is done now. Okay, this is his last kind of chance. This defeat ended Napoleon's last bid for power, called the Hundred Days Campaign. It took no chances this time. The British shipped Napoleon to St. Helena. I'm going to show you a map in just a minute that shows you how far away. But this time they're like, nope, no Elba for you. We're sending you so far away you'll never make it on a little ship back. No way. And there he lived out the rest of his life. So this island is off in the South Atlantic, off the coast of Africa, quite a distance. And he lived there in lonely exile for 6 years. And this is the time when Marie-Louise decided, nah, I don't think I want to live in the South Atlantic with a husband who's got gastric cancer. Nope. So he writes his memoirs there, lives out the rest of his life, and dies in 1821 on this island of St. Helena. Okay. Without a doubt, Napoleon was a military genius and a brilliant administrator. Yet all his victories and other achievements must be measured against the millions of lives that were lost in his wars. The French writer Alexis de Tocqueville summed up Napoleon's character by saying, he was as great as a man can be without any virtue. Napoleon's defeat opened the door for the freed European countries to now establish a brand new order, which will be settled at some place called the Congress of Vienna. You already saw this map. You can see where Waterloo is located if you would like to. And I believe we talked about Battle of Borodino was yesterday, and Austerlitz and Leipzig the other day. We talked about Battle of Trafalgar, which is way down the southern edge of Spain. That was like the beginning of the week or the end of last week. And you can see Elba here too. Now this is where St. Helena is. Look at that. Italy is the boot that you can barely see at the very top of the page. They're like, no, you are going way, way, way away this time. That's a long ways away. It's a tiny little island. Okay. Just for a little context, keep in mind that the British, the Prussians, the Swedes, the Russians, the Austrians are all joining forces. I mean, these are massive military forces that are going to be fighting against the French. The French were able to kind of re-put together an army under this kind of last bid of strength for Napoleon that amounts to maybe 250,000, maybe 300,000 troops, but they're being mobilized quickly, not trained very well. This is a quick fix, and they faced a coalition of 850,000 soldiers on 4 fronts. I mean, this is a difficult numbers battle for Napoleon to win. Waterloo, off to St. Helena, and there you die. Supposedly the last words he says are head of army, although if you look back in history, they say the last words of many people are head of army or long live the state, and you have to wonder if those were tweaked afterward with legacy in mind in the tomb of Napoleon. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.